Hello, welcome to The Exhausted Programmer. My name is Alexander, and today we are making a backup script. My first draft of this video was to make it into two parts because I assumed that the backup script that I had written years ago was complex, but looking at it, I think we can get through it in one video, and I'm going to have to stretch it out maybe a little bit to fill up a normal 10 minutes. We'll see. The first thing we want to do, though, is to think about what we were trying to do with this backup script. So the first thing we're going to do is not write code, but write a bunch of comments. As my personal preference, I like to have in my home directory a place for all my scripts and a directory called scripts. So we'll go there, and there is no backup script here, so we're going to make one. I'm calling it home backup because we're going to be backing up the home directory. If you want to rename it something else to better fit the purpose that you're going to be writing, that's fine, but this is my intention with this backup. The first draft of any script, I would suggest just write and don't even think about it. We know we need this to run in Bash, and we talked about in a previous video how we put this at the beginning to help out users and operating systems to know what's running. We know that we're going to want to log our information, so logging info. This way, if there's a problem, we can look at files to understand it. We know we actually want to do the backup, which includes bundling it and then transferring it. And then maybe we want to look about limiting the number of backups we have, because if you've done any kind of perpetual logging or backing up, you know, data usage or filling up a hard drive happens at some point. So we'll limit number of backups. And now we see that instead of writing one big script, we just have to write a few simple things. Let's start with the first section here and logging the information. The thing is I've gotten this block of code somewhere and I use it in all my scripts because logging is important and this does what I want it to do. The first thing we're going to do is sort of protect failing in the middle of this script. I don't know if this is needed. The person who provided this script online didn't know if it was needed, but we put it in here just in case. So it's to save the normal outputs so that we can recover. If we do this for recovery, we can exec 3 to 1 and then 4 to 1. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, as you are running some code, you have two output streams, your standard out and your standard error. They normally default to 1 and 2, but all these things are very customizable. This script will customize it so that both of them go into logging. Actually, one goes into logging and the standard error goes to standard output. You'll often see something along the lines of 1 into something, and then I'm going to call it log file. And then you'll see this 4 characters in a lot of places. And what it does is everything that would go to standard out, which is 2, will now go into, standard error will now go into standard out. And we're also just going to say everything that goes into standard out, let's put in a log file. But to finish up this fixing things in case they break, we'll do something called a trap. And my understanding of traps from looking at documentation is that if something goes wrong, this will still happen. This being whatever's in the quotations. So we're going to put 2 back to 4 and 1, 2, 3. And there we go. Those 0, 1, 2, and 3 are exit statuses for our code. These are just standard output signals that one program can use to another to tell if it executed okay or badly or some other thing. If we are going beyond 4 different exit codes in our script, we're probably writing too much complexity into a single script. So this is a good catch-all. For this specifically, we probably only just need 2 numbers. But this is a block I copy and paste everywhere. I am writing it here, but in my own usage, I don't write this stuff out. I just copy and paste it. So let's finish out writing the comment so that if someone ever comes across this in the future, they'll know what is happening. Like I said, this on exit values of 1 or 0 through 3. It'll run a quoted command, and then this sends all output to log file. Now we haven't defined log file, which is something that we'll do in a second. But all the definitions we want to do at the top so that if we need to transfer this to somewhere else, all the little settings that we want to change are at the top, easy to change, and then everything else will act accordingly. For reasons that will make sense later, our log file will exist in our home directory, which we'll have to define in a second. And then there will be a backup directory. And then we will want today's date, which we'll have to figure out how to get, and make that a log file. So there's 3 more things we need to define just for logging. Let's start with today's date. We saw in previous videos that I like the date command because you can do a lot with it, including formatting the output. And for this case, we're going to do capital Y, lowercase m, and lowercase d. Now, if you want to know what that does, we can copy this. Let's just put that into the background, and then if we run it, and let's not run the variable name, we see that we just get the year, month, date text output that is very common in log files. There are other options. Again, you can look that up if you want to. Let's bring our Vim session to the foreground with FG, and let's properly close that off. We also need to know where our home directory is. So home directory equals, for me, it is home and then my username. Your home directory can be whatever you want it to be, but if you don't know how to go about making all those settings, just try to figure out what it is, and we can do that. Let's say real quick by doing pwd. And that shows me that my home directory is home Alex, and then there is the scripts directory that I'm inside. Foreground again. And probably the silliest thing to define is our backup directory, because we're going to use this long string for a simple string. But again, this is for better customization as you move from computer to computer. There might be reasons why you don't want your backup directory in your home directory. There's things you can do to make that a little bit better, whatever. The fact that our backup directory is in our home directory and we're going to back up our home directory will introduce a problem in a little bit, something that most people should expect, but we'll get to that in a second. Our next section is backup bundling, and that might not make sense right away, but to make up a good backup system, you don't want to put all your files onto another system because getting it back will be file by file. Instead, if we bundle it together, it makes the transfer easier, and we can also compress it at the same time to maybe save us some space. In a previous video, we looked at 7-zip. You could use 7-zip. There's also just zip. There's a program called RAR for WinRAR, but I said in that video, and I will say it again, I prefer using tar. It is just a preference at this point. I'm not going to try to argue the reasons, except that it is fairly easy to use tar. To use tar for this example, we need to give it a few flags. I save it to a .gz, so I need the Z flag. We're going to compress. On my keyboard, the X and C are right beside each other. X means to expand, C means to compress, and then V for verbose, so that we get a lot of output as we're saving stuff. This output will then go into our log file. So now we're already building into each other. We do need to give it a file name. So we need an F flag for file name, backup directory. Inside the backup directory, I like to save my log files, and right alongside my backup files. And for that, we can use today's date again and home. And I have not defined home yet. So for this, we're just going to call it home and just the date. So underscore to separate the word home from the date for easy readability. And then the file extensions. These are set purely for readability. Linux doesn't care what the extensions are, but it just looks nicer. All right, so we have the tar set up, except we're not telling it what to back up. And also, very importantly, we're not telling it what to exclude. This is going to get a little on the longer side, so let me introduce something real quick. A backslash just tells the interpreter or bash or whatever that the line continues on even though it doesn't continue on in this file. If I hit enter instead without the backslash, it would assume I'm trying to run the program tar with no arguments, which could lead into an error or a hangup. I'm not really sure at this point. You could try it out, but there's no need. Instead, we put in this backslash and say, keep on reading. This is important because your line links are very, very important. It's one of the things that I will criticize internally when I look at new code is if the line links are too long. What is a good line length? It's up to you. I try to stick to 80 characters wide, but if I see someone sticking to 100 or even 120, as long as it's consistent, it's fine. When it goes off the screen though, that's annoying. And with 80 characters, you can take a computer from the 80s and still have it fit on the screen. And so I stick with 80 characters wide. Let's start with the big problem here. If you try to back up a directory that contains the backup of the directory, you'll get into a recursive loop. In testing, this eventually errors out without completely filling up your hard drive with space, but it does give you something that is unusable, or at least I assume unusable. You don't know exactly how much you're going to be bringing back when you try to unarchive the files. So let's just go ahead and tell it to exclude something. These flags, again, you can find in the man pages. I always recommend looking up the man pages. But if we do this, we can say exclude that backup directory that we defined earlier. We need the backslash because the command is still going, but that right there will keep us from backing up our own backup directory. But we're still not done because we still haven't told it what to back up. We want to grab our bashrc file and our vimrc file because these things are settings that I like to keep from computer to computer to keep things consistent. But we also need to look at what else we want. I know there's a scripts directory, but I'm not actually sure what else is in this on this computer. So let's go look. Let's go up a directory. I have this playground directory and a test directory. Usually test directories are not stuff I want to keep. So I'm going to just remove that right now. This tmux script I would like to keep, but do I already have that? I do not have it in my scripts. That's where it should go. And let's move the tree script into our scripts directory as well. And so we just have these two directories, playground and scripts. Foreground, the commands, we already got scripts. And we also want to get playground. Now, for readability's sake, in my mind, I want this to be alphabetical order. In Vim, you can move lines around pretty easily. And we do not need the backslash at the end here because this is the end of the command. Now, the thing is when you go to run this command, do you know what directory you'll be in every time you run it? If right now, if we ran this in the home directory, everything will work. But if we try to run this in, say, the scripts directory, it will not work. So to give us a little bit more security, we can tell it what directory to be into. We could make this as easy as just telling it to cd into the home directory. But I'm going to suggest we use a different program or a different command, and that is push D. What does push D do? Well, if we try to push D, our scripts directory, right now we're in our home directory, we see that we're now in that directory. We can then go into our playground, and what you're seeing is that we're creating a stack of directories. With push D, there's popd, which is the reason why I really want to use this. And we see that we are back one directory, and then we can do it one more time to go back one more directory. If we try to do it one more time, we should get an error. The stack is empty. So if we have a push D, we know we need a popd. And that sort of works as brackets. And I'm really liking brackets and indentions for readability. So now you know for every push D, there's a popd. And if there's a second push D before you get to the popd, I would suggest maybe even indenting at that point for readability's sake. Now we did talk about limiting our number of backups and transferring. I wrote these down without putting any thought into it because I really think that's how you should start off writing your scripts. Just list the things you want to do, but that doesn't mean we always do them in the right order. So if we take this, and we're going to actually do this inside the push D, we were going to limit the number of backups we have. First, we need to go into our backup directory. And like I said, for this, we might actually just want to indent for readability. And then we also know that when we do this, we'll be back one directory. And the question is then how do we get the number of files that we have and how do we act accordingly? Well, first, let's go ahead and make our backup directory. And then let's just create some fake files real quick. If we do 0010, this should give us 11 files. Oop, I messed that up. Oh well, it's 11 files, even though they're not TX doesn't make any sense. But we're just going to delete these anyway. We can get a word count. We can use word count, a program, in order to get a number of words in a text output. We can give it the -L to get the number of lines. An example of this might just be our home backup right now has 37 lines. If we go ahead and look at it, we can see that at the very bottom, yep, 37 lines. Vim gives us this nice little output right here. But for us, we're going to get the number of files using word count, but we have to give it the list of files. We can use ls. And then if we pipe that into word count L, it gives us 11. For some reason, I would assume that these would need to be on new lines like ls-L, but we actually see that that's not the case. In fact, if we do this, we'll actually get an off by 1 error because of this total at the top. So while it might not make sense in my mind how it reads these 11 files as 11 lines of text, it is more accurate and easier to write. That will give us our file count, but then what are we going to do in order to fix the number of files? Well, we'll get to that in just a second. Let's go ahead and go into our script again and just save what we have. So we're in the right directory. File count equals, and then we can store it as this. And this should tell us the number of files. Right now it's 11. But we're going to want it to be 10. So first, let's see if it is greater than 10. If our file count is greater than 10, don't forget the then, what we're going to do is run this command, and we'll break it down in just a second as to what each thing does. So we're going to list the directories. We're going to give it this T flag. If you look in the man pages, you'll see that the T will list the files out based on their modified date. This will be very helpful for us to get rid of the oldest ones instead of just 2 at random. We're going to get rid of 2 because we're going to get rid of a log file and a backup file usually at a time because we're going to create them 2 at a time. So in standard use, we should be creating 2 files and 4, 6, 8, 10. And then once we hit 12, we're going to have to delete them. SED is called a stream editor, and this will allow us to edit the stream as it comes in, which is to delete the first 10 lines, so the newest 10 items. And then we're going to pass the output, which should be 2 files in our normal usage, but in our case, in our test, it's going to be 1 file into this xargs. And what it does is allows you to pass in lines of commands and then attach them to another command. So in this case, we're just going to remove that line. The D is for demarcation, and we'll take a look at that in just 1 second. So first, let's start with that -T command in ls. If I do ls-T, nothing seems to change. Well, the 10 actually comes up first. All these were created at the same time, but for some reason, I guess it just assumes the 10 was the first one. But we can be more exact with this. So let's go ahead and create another file, which is now at the end. We're going to give it a second. We're going to create another this file. Oop. Another just empty file. And now we see that 11 comes before the A, but we know for a fact the A was created first. So if we do this, we'll see that, well, look, the 11 is the newest file and it's the first one. Then this is the second newest, and then these are the old ones. So if we pass that into sed, and again, we can edit the file, or the stream, sorry, it's a stream editor. And we'll see that it just chops off the first 10 lines, leaving us with the last 3. So those are the ones we want to delete. And if we pass that into xargs, give it the new line as a demarcation, and we can just say remove. When we ls here, we see that we are missing the 04, the 00, and the 01. So sure enough, we are. Just to clarify my language a little bit, I'm reading this stuff from memory, and then I realize I don't actually know if the -d means what I think it means, but it is the delimiter, again, to tell it that break on the new line for each command. Let's go back to our script and see what's left to do. The first thing we see is that we will go into the backup directory, get the file count, compare it to 10, delete all but the most recent 10, get out of the backup directory. So we're back in the home directory, and everything seems to be working, but we're trying to make this program a little bit more transferable, and having 10 hard set limits the next person on what they want to use this for. So let's go ahead and create a number for this, a variable called backup number. We can do that there. And then for this to work, we need to wrap it up in these curly braces. And then we can do that. And then we also need to define our variable up here. But what does backup number even mean? Well, if you're asking that, then let's leave a question or a comment here. Usually I use comments when I can't think of a good variable name. So number of files left in backup directory includes log files. And there we go. Save. For this last part where we were transferring the backup somewhere for having 2 of a backup, because good backups means you have it in more than one location, I am just going to move this on a different part of this computer. For my own personal sake though, I do transfer it to a different computer. Either way, it works using rsync. So the first thing I do is to then check to see if the offsite backup is working. If it is, then we can rsync using these commands. It tries to compress if it can, and it will do it verbosely. And we'll look up in a second what the A flag means, because I cannot think right now. But if we take our backup directory, which now should contain the number of files that we wanted to have, in our case 10, we're going to transfer that to another location, and we're going to call that our offsite backup. If this works, we're going to echo success. This will go into our log file. Or we will let our log file know that something didn't happen because the backup directory was not there. We could maybe make this a little bit better for future sakes by doing that, and that way we can just search for the word error to see if any of our recent backups had problems, and then we can close it out. You can do something similar to create even a second backup location. This is something that I do in my own personal use, but it's the same thing. Check to see if it exists, rsync the stuff over, and make sure you log using echo that it was successful or it wasn't. We do want to make sure that we're doing this in the home directory, so let's not forget to put that all the way down there. And that is basically our script, except for we have a few variables that we need to define. Before we do that, let's go ahead and figure out what this -a flag does for rsync. So if we man rsync, and you do have to scroll, rsync has a long man page. We could search for it, but sometimes the searching can cause the output to look a little weird. Oh, archival mode. and then it's equal to all these commands. And when I looked in these commands, they made sense. Specifically recursive, to copy over links, not important here, but it can be important for project files. So if we go back into our home directory, we can define the two variables, or the one variable that we do not have, which is the offsite backup. In a future video, we'll dive deeper into rsync to show how we can use it to transfer files across computers or just on the same computer. It basically works the same way. But for personal use, just to explain why we're not covering it here, is I usually just mount the external hard drive from another computer onto my computer using just normal Linux mount commands. In this case, like I said, I'm running this on, or maybe I didn't say, I am running this on a Windows computer. And so there we have this directory called /mount. You can get to the C directory. You can get to the users directory. And then mine, because Microsoft is so bad at collectively combining all their usernames. Apparently mine had a conflict with someone else's, so they just chopped mine up when they started combining stuff. But inside that directory, there is a desktop, and then we're just going to create a directory called backup. I don't even know if that exists right now, but it will in just a second. And this will rsync stuff over from one to the other. Let's save and quit. And real quick, I'm going to make sure that there is a backup directory here by creating a new folder called backup. Let's go ahead and make this big. Again, we can see our root directory, and then we can go into the mount and see that there is a C, there is a users, there is an AMA 89 for me, and then there is a desktop and a backup directory that is empty. If we go back a directory, there we go. We can now run our script. For the sake of running the script, I am going to keep these trash files in here. We'll see that they'll be deleted and everything will work out as expected. The other thing we want to do is, you'll notice that some of these are green, some of these are not. If we look at our LSLA, it's because some of these are executable and some of these are not. If I go ahead and chmod 744, I guess is what these are. And then we can just do the home backup. And now it is green as well. I think we did this in a previous video by giving it chmod and then +X or something like that. There's multiple ways of doing it. But the 744 is the binary of these 3 is 7, and then these 3 are 4, and these 3 are also 4. If you don't understand why, simple binary stuff, I'm pretty sure I've covered in a previous video, but just know that that's what this translates to. Often you'll see 755. Obviously the first number, or the first 3 are not going to change because it's still 7. But now anyone can execute this as well as read it. It just depends on personal use. Before we run this script, we need to make a few corrections. I ran it and got some errors in my logging, which was nice to have. But the first problem is that there needs to be a space between the square bracket and the first variable. We do that elsewhere where there's a space. It's just something that I didn't catch. Another thing that I should have known, but I didn't, is that sed treats single quotes and double quotes differently. And so we need to do this. And just something that I had to actually look up is that it also wants these to be curly braces and not regular parentheses. But with those changes there, we can run the backup script. We see that we have our 10 files there, and we expect 2 of them to be gone when we run this. So if we run it, it doesn't take long because my home directory isn't that big. That was not a cut. And if we look in here, we see that we're missing the 02 and 03 files because they were the 2 oldest files at this point. We can take a look at our log and see that it went through all these directories and files and put them there. This is why I like the verbose for rsync. So we have good logging. We have these here. It didn't recursively run on itself, and that's great. And then if we do go to our C directory, which I could do that, or I could just open up here, we see that here's our directory, and here's our log file. I have multiple monitors, which is where these things are opening up. And there you go. It's now in 2 locations, although they're both on the same computer at this point. You could easily make that second location anywhere else. In future videos, we can look at about how to make this runnable, but actually, let's just go ahead and do that now. You have something called crontab on Linux machines, at least Debian-based Linux machines like Ubuntu. And if we give it the -E, we see that we can edit this. This might not work for you if you don't have your editor variable set, things that it might prompt you for, it might not. I don't know. We'll tell it on the 0th hour, minute of the 0th hour, and then every day of the month, and some other stuff I don't actually remember at this point. We want it to run our home scripts, home backup, and that's not where it's at. It is in home / my username, scripts, home backup. And this will run every night at midnight and create a backup directory. I might append a little something tomorrow to show that this ran in the middle of the night. But right now, our backup directory has these files. If we take a look at it in the next clip, we would expect the 05 and the 06 to be gone and everything else there. Here it is the next day, and I just want to show that the crontab did work. First, by pointing out that the crontab did not work. I didn't think about making a video on crontab. I didn't do my research. So you need to do a couple of things to get crontab working on a machine. First, your username needs to be inside the user group crontab. You can do that with this command. I'll discuss what these flags do. The G will either add or remove you from a group listed, the group, in this case, crontab, and me being my username. If you're not sure what your username is, we'll look that up in just a second. The -A is for appending, so that if you are already in this group, instead of removing you, it will not remove you, which is a nice little feature. I am now in the user group. I was not in the group before. So this shouldn't do anything. Next, to make sure that crontab services are actually running, or the cron service, there's a command called, your username. Who am I? That's your username. All right, now to make sure that crontab is actually running, you can run this service status all on this machine. It might be different on other machines. This is an operating system specific thing. And here you see a bunch of services, most of them not running, which makes sense as this is actually Ubuntu on Windows. You don't want a lot of stuff running that you're never planning on using. One of those things is crontab. I'm pretty sure crontab is on by default in some distros. I could be wrong, but you can always check here. The plus means it's there, the minus means it's not. But if it's not running, you can always run sudo service cron, the service that you want to run, and tell it to start. You can tell it to restart, and you can tell it to stop. Since it's already running, I'm going to tell it to restart. A little behind the scenes, almost any old code that talks about restart is actually just appends stop and then start in the background. So it's going to stop it, and then it's going to start it. Finally, just to be safe, so I didn't have to wait around for too long, I went into my crontab to edit it one more time and just saved and quit. I did change the time so I could show that it does work. So at 9 a.m. this morning, when doing that, it says installing the new crontab. Since it wasn't running before and I wasn't in the user group before, I did this just to make sure that it was set up correctly. When doing all that, we can go into a backup directory and see that here we go. At 9 a.m., it created the log file and it created the backup. We can look at the log file, seeing that it just backed up everything as we'd expect. And there we go. There should be one more clip from tomorrow by the time this video gets made, showing that it did run overnight. But even without that, I am confident that this video is a success. We have the home backup script that works when ran. And I am confident that the crontab will work like it always works for me, and it will run again at midnight my time. It uses your system clock, whatever. If you want to know more about crontab, a good place to start is look up Cron Guru. It's a thing that will help you figure out what those first 5 numbers are in a cron command. It's the minute, the hour, and then 3 more variables that help you set days based on day of the week or day of the month and month of the year. Those things combined can get very precise, so you can have things run in very unique ways. But usually I just have everything run once a day or once a week, and that's pretty easy with just the timestamp and then 3 stars. In future videos, we'll continue to look at what you can do with Bash, what you can do with automating things and then just putting it into a cron tab so it runs every night so that you don't have to run things yourself. I think this is ultimately the purpose of computers, is to do work so we don't have to. Yes, it took some research to figure out what each one of these commands does and how to get them to work out exactly right, but sometimes that research is just watching a YouTube video. I hope you take this concept and you use it in your own personal life. I could have ran this to back up other directories on this Windows computer. So even if you're not running Linux, you can have it back up directories on Windows and then transfer them somewhere else. You can combine the rsync, not just with going across computers, mounting directories, but I do know sometimes things like Dropbox and Google Drive allows you to mount directories onto your computer, and you could use that as your backup to have a cloud-based backup that doesn't cost anything if you're using the free versions. Maintaining the sizes of the home directories is a whole nother discussion so that it doesn't get bigger. The way I do home backups and do it in my home directory, and that's where I do all my work. If I'm doing some heavy video editing on a Linux computer that is doing these backups, those things can get quite big. So sometimes you might want to exclude even more directories, but we saw how to exclude directories. If you have any questions about this topic or any other topics covered on this channel, or have any suggestions for things that you'd like to see this channel cover, please drop a comment. Also, if you can, like and subscribe this video, and thank you for watching.